And we have to solve that, because when it comes to COVID relief funding and various sorts of funding and grants and support for the industry, it's much harder to lobby for that money when you don't have codes that specifically say what your economic value is.
Welcome to The Meeting Room. I'm James Lancaster, and I'm delighted to be joined by Mike Duignan, or Dr Mike Duignan, founder of the Centre for Events and Festivals. Welcome to The Meeting Room, Mike.
Thanks for having me.
Mike, what is the Centre for Events and Festivals? Good
question. The Centre for Events and Festivals, CEF, is the world's international professional body for events and festivals, a united home for everyone working in our diverse and crazy and mad and wild and wacky industry, irregardless of where you live, geographically, sectorally, event type, event role. We want to be a united community to serve everyone, but also primarily honour the work that's been done across the various associations, networks, universities, etc.
So it's not an association per se?
It's not. No.
Okay. So the events sector, if we can call it that, is very diverse. It's also very fragmented. What has stopped the events industry from having a kind of unified voice so far, which joins business events, sports events, festivals, because that doesn't really exist at the moment?
It doesn't. We've got some marvellous work, excellent work that's been done in really specific pockets all around the world, depending on the topic that you look at. So, for example, crowd management, business events, the business of events, right through to different geographies. And we've done a really good job in separating ourselves, sort of either geographically, industrially, based on the sort of work that we do. But we've never had a chartered institute or an institute that sort of sits above everything. Not in a grandeur way, but just in a way that sort of can connect the dots that are going on the ground. And there's so much brilliant work that's out there, so many standards that are being created within specific areas, and so much thought leadership expertise that's going in, so much advocacy that's going in. We are a diverse, wonderful industry, and there is so much to play with, so much to honour. But we just need to connect the dots, see the patterns, bring together particularly the academy and the industry to fuse together the academic knowledge and the industrial knowledge. And to be honest, the best analogy is probably a clock. You know, at the moment, we are a series of parts. Some bits are more joined up than others, but you put us all together and you make a clock. You provide a much more coherent picture of the power and potential of events all over the world. And that's what we want to do. And that's why our board is represented by everyone across the event sectors around the world. And then we've got really good people that serve on our professor board as well. So we're trying to sort of honour that. It's a tricky tightrope.
You have business events, sports events, festivals, public events. They exist in silos, essentially, but they would argue that's kind of their strength. And that, you know, if you're in business events, you need to be taken seriously in a way that Glastonbury isn't particularly serious. And so how do you get around that sort of tension?
There's a lot of people thinking that we might come into their space a little bit, but it's about recognizing that it's not a zero-sum game. People all over the world in advanced industries all have broader associations and professional networks that they're part of, as well as really specific ones. It's about just honouring the specific value that each of these networks has, bringing them together with the academy, with the industry to make better decisions, deliver better event, to draw on more knowledge, because ultimately we exist in sort of a bounded rationality of knowledge that we use to invoke what we do on a day-to-day basis. But there is so much better stuff that we can do if we can bring in some of that academic knowledge with industrial knowledge. And that is a big imperative for universities on the other side of the coin. But invariably, it doesn't happen that much, purely because the knowledge that's created by both industrial organizations and academic organizations are either behind paywalls, membership offers, fees, and it's really difficult to see the synergy when so much of it is locked down and protected. I serve as our editor-in-chief of Event Management Journal, which is our oldest, most prestigious academic journal. I see all this science coming out, people working tirelessly over years to do science in all the different areas of events. But it's just so hard to convey that to time-poor practitioners. So we somehow needed a platform to bring that together, to showcase to people. But also on the other side, I just was at conferences and workshops and networks and seeing all this brilliant expertise and thinking that it's sort of just going poof up in smoke and no one else knows about it. How can we capture it? And that is so important to do that. Otherwise, we can't collectively build knowledge. So invariably, there's tension, but there's so much opportunity to do better.
So ultimately, a business event and a festival have more in common than divides them.
They are an event. Events are event. 95% of what we do in events is so similar across all events, with all the local contextual flavour and difference. That honours the different areas of trade shows, exhibitions, right from the Glastonburys.
You're an academic yourself. Is this your moment to kind of bridge the gap between the academic world, the universities, the kind of, like you say, the science of events, and industry itself, which may be completely blindsided to all that?
Entirely. I always felt like a bit of a fraud in academia. I was more of a pracademic, the practical academic, keeping things real. I just so happened to take that track in academia and sort of feel like an interloper in that field. And now bridging the gap, you definitely feel like an interloper because you are trying to straddle two sorts of information and data and insights. And we invariably, because we're not a discipline, and this is really important, we're not a discipline like economics or anthropology or sociology. We also don't have the discipline of language. Invariably, what happens is that we all talk past each other. We all create new ideas and concepts. And that means that it's incredibly hard to build knowledge. And so therefore, we don't want to be a steward of knowledge. We don't want to be a gatekeeper of knowledge. But we do have to have a sort of more general position on things to try and sort of look at the patterns between what we're saying and to build a broader picture. Without doing that, we will never be able to advocate. We'll never be able to straddle the knowledge and essentially build a more theoretical basis of what events are, driven from the local on the ground stuff that we do. So that's a really important big mission of SEF.
The missions I'm getting are sort of improve events themselves through science and the kind of interplay between the practitioner and the academic. But also, I was looking at your website, which you launched recently, the new revamped website. It's absolutely fantastic, by the way. One thing I love about the website is that you don't have to find anything. If you just keep scrolling down, whatever you want will eventually come up. There's nothing behind links. There's nothing behind walls or anything. So it's like an old-fashioned sweet shop in many ways. It just keeps giving the more you go down. So I thought it's a great website. But what I did notice was this talk of advocacy in there. Is advocacy going to be a big role for SEF, or is it going to be a sort of secondary role?
It definitely started as secondary, without a doubt. But it's become clear through the hundreds of conversations that we have to play a really key role. I think the ISIC code problem is a big issue. The idea that we don't have at an international level a clear set of codes that capture the economic value of events is a heinous crime, and we have to solve that. Because when it comes to COVID relief funding and various sorts of funding and grants and support for the industry, it's much harder to lobby for that money when you don't have codes that specifically say what your economic value is. It's really difficult to get a seat at the table in industrial strategies all over the world if you don't have that code. So we fundamentally have to do that. My biggest challenge is seeing how that's being done at the moment. And there is a huge amount of lobbying from the business events, exhibitions, trade shows sector. That's fantastic. There's been excellent work, but primarily it is from that perspective. And we have to absolutely open that out to performing arts events, music events, cultural events, public events, because otherwise it sort of undermines advocacy broadly. And the worst thing would be that it creates a two-tier system whereby business events obviously get more priority over other sorts of events. And for the Centre for Events and Festivals, trying to be the Chartered Institute of Events and Festivals eventually, that's difficult to hear, especially when we're honouring all types of events.
Because there's one argument in the business events world that the advocacy piece hasn't been that great. It's getting better. I've noticed a lot of associations are now starting to employ a public affairs expert or somebody. And I know there's been a bit of a link up between UFI and ICA recently. The business events community would argue that, look, all the attention goes to the Olympics, the arts, Glastonbury. We're the ones that don't get much attention from politicians. So we don't want to dilute our advocacy effort. Is that a fair comment?
I think that's entirely fair. I don't think they're counter to one another. Without a doubt, I remember when Professor Leo Jago called the business events sector the ugly duckling of the events and festival industry, which invariably it is. It's a little bit more dry, but we all know that dry things come with very important things. Very important business events that advance medical technologies, etc. There's a huge amount of value. So I absolutely accept that, and I absolutely agree with it. But every type of event does something entirely different. The sports events get a lot of government attention, certainly on a funding level when it comes to major events because of the soft power, political, geopolitical piece, the destination image, place branding, etc., that sort of side. But we don't want to pit events against each other. They all do something very marvelous. If you think about music events, thinking about individual transformation, escapism, why do people go into these sorts of spaces? It's to escape family members they don't like, kids, their life, debt, so many of things. So we do have to have a holistic, connected picture of what they're all doing in their different ways. And we can do that all together. We can't do that so well in silos when we're looking at the other side and going, I can't learn anything from you. You're counter to my objectives. We can't do that, obviously. So we're trying to honour and showcase the entire picture. The big part of what Ceph wants to play now, advocacy has become more important. We've launched a little app called Event Advocate. I'm not trying to sell you anything. It's completely free. And you can go on this app and you can upload your impact story. Upload all your qualitative and quantitative data. Promise it's not going anywhere. But to aggregate all that into a big data set. Because ultimately, the thing that undermines everything is that we think that we could do advocacy in rich lined mahogany rooms, hobnobbing politicians, etc. But we don't have the power and the tools and the data aggregated enough to have those conversations at any substantive level. And, I spend a lot of time with government officials. I know what they want, and many people do know what they want, but are we coming armed? Not really, and we absolutely need to bring universities into the fold in that too, which we're not doing enough. There are pockets, but we're not doing enough.
So the existing associations in the business event space, of which there are many, as you have alluded to, what's your relationship with them going to be in terms of advocacy? Because they'll all be doing their own advocacy work. Are you going to sort of bring them into the fold? Is that the idea? Or
wherever possible, invariably, some organizations, associations are much more open than others. Some have a much more profit commercial agenda. So they see Ceph as a threat. And I completely understand why. It's not a zero-sum game. But that's quite hard to get over to organizations sometimes. Providing the Ceph platform is a free way of sharing their advocacy, sharing data with them, having data agreements with them to aggregate the data so we can bring it all together and synthesize it to make a bigger picture. Argument is absolutely key. That's going to be vital for the UN side of this. I think Ceph tries to position itself as Switzerland, quite neutral, sector agnostic, topic agnostic. We have showcased practice and policy and advocacy from the formation of the UN after the natural disaster of Skopje, and how that formed the UN habitat and how the event brought together the Allies and the Red Army for the first time ever. We moved from that to ABBA Void superstars and hologram technology and whether that's going to be acceptable to consumers. We're doing a few pieces on Martin's Law. Gary Story, head of health and safety at Formula One, has just written a piece about proportional safety and fear-mongering and various other things like that. So we are really agnostic. We're not trying to step on toes, but recognizing that that's an inevitable part of innovation and disruption in so many ways.
does Ceph have, are we calling it Ceph or CEF? What's the...
Go Ceph.
Let's go with Ceph. It sounds quite cool. Does Ceph have its own public affairs specialist? Are you one? Will you be going into talk to politicians at EU level or even higher than that? How's that going to actually work in practice?
There's a lot of members of the board that are engaged in that activity. So we've got 100 members of the board that sort of represent. Some are more obviously active than others. We talk on the media quite a bit. We're getting a lot more media opportunities. I think that's a key thing. I don't think we dominate the public discourse enough on the BBC, on when the budget comes out, I always see UK hospitality and all the other industries come out in full force. We seem to be very fragmented when it comes to the UK. I can definitely speak for. I suspect that that's a global picture too, I hear. I talk a little bit as well, personal relationships, but there's a lot of people in this, and there's a lot of people that we work with to have those conversations. But to be honest, it's about the research, it's about the insights, it's about the professional excellence framework that we have that tries to articulate what a good event professional looks like, because we have to start with a Northern Star, or if you want a more grounded, foundations of the house. And then we've built professional standards around professional practice map and professional values map, because without those, how do we orientate ourselves? And the key thing for us was to operationalize that through our fellowship scheme, to have professional recognition across 5 levels. And by doing that, we create a much more cohesive, connected picture of what are the things that we value. What is excellence? We can't agree on it. And before we jump into the media and we do all this advocacy, we jump in front of politicians, we really need to be aware of who we are and what we're good at and why we're doing this. And invariably, events and festivals happen all the time without any motive, any intention, any theory of change. It's remarkable. We need to tighten up. We need to be professional. And some of the things that we're doing at CEF is just trying to help that. But we have to be honest with ourselves that we are a cool, fun, interesting, frivolous industry, depending on which events you look. Maybe the Davos, a little bit less frivolous than the cultural performing arts and the music festival.
Well, I don't know about that.
Well, maybe not behind closed doors. But ultimately, we really do need to tighten up. And I don't think there's anyone that's advocating against professionalization, but we have to get our house in order before we start moving forward. But we're running in many ways for advocacy before we're walking. We need big data sets. We need to know the language that generally is used across government and policy, that resonates across all international governments when it comes to economic indicators, etc. Of course, much of that is localized, and there's lots of local context of what language is accepted. But that can be done at a local level. We're not part of that. We're part of creating a more general view, general patterns, general advice, and that's key for us.
There was one point, if I may, the cross-pollination of business events and festivals and whatnot. It's already happening. Business events are starting to go down the festivalization route, and I suspect you see the opposite is true as well. But Mike, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.